Hello, Krishna.
Good morning.
Morning. Have your people joined?
Yes.
So we start?
Yeah.
You want to
see me?
Yeah.
Ma'am,
थोड़ा और रुकना है?
we have all the speakers.
Yeah.
We can begin if you permit.
That's fine. मुझे कोई प्रॉब्लम आप चलें.
Good morning. I welcome everyone to this seminar, to the national webinar. We have our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Najma Akhtar, with us. And before we begin, I would just like to speak about why we organized this webinar. Well, COVID-19 pandemic restricted and the restricted movement have increased the risk factors for violence, exploitation, and abuse of children, especially those who belong to socio-economically backward and marginalized communities. This is a universal crisis, and for some children, the impact will be lifelong. Every day, homeless children, migrant children, and children living on the streets face unspeakable human rights violations and threats to their safety and well being. And this has multiplied manyfold during the pandemic. For many of these girls and boys, access to basic health care and facilities is extremely limited, while cramped living conditions make social distancing unfeasible. These children, too often hidden from the world's view, must not be forgotten during the COVID-19 response. In this background, the present webinar has been organized. The chief guest of this webinar is our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Najma Akhtar. Professor Najma Akhtar is a widely acclaimed educationist and an academic administrator. Professor Akhtar is also the first woman to hold the post of Vice Chancellor in the 100 years of history of Jamia
Millia. Wait for a
Millia.
minute. Akshay, can you wait for a minute? The Vice Chancellor has probably left because of some technical reasons. Let her join in a minute.
Okay.
Should I call her? Zubair sir?
Let me give her 2 minutes. Maybe she'll
Okay. Dean sir, good morning.
Good morning. Yeah. Hi, Aftam. Nice to see you.
Same here. How are you after ages?
I know. I don't know when we shall meet face to face.
Hope soon.
That's true. Hi, Professor Sajid. How are you? And Professor Zubair.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. I got
Good.
your book that was edited by you on the on social work education by Bloomberg.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, yes, I got it, and the articles are pretty good. I must say that.
Okay. Yeah.
अर्चना आ गया फिर बीच में गायब हो गया था
So, ma'am, we can begin?
Yes, please.
Yes. So, I was just giving a background of the. May I request all the participants to mic अपने mute कर लीजिए. Mute their mics. I was talking about the background of this webinar, and we said that a lot of vulnerable and marginalized children, they are not to be forgotten during the COVID-19 response. And the chief guest for this webinar is our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Najma Akhtar. Professor Najma Akhtar is a widely acclaimed educationist and an academic administrator. She is also the first woman to hold the post of Vice Chancellor in 100 years of history of Jamia Millia Islamia. She is known for spearheading International Educational Administrators course for senior officials from 130 countries for more than 50 years at NIPA. Widely acclaimed educationist, Professor Akhtar is a gold medalist from AMU and completed her PhD in education from Kurukshetra University. She holds posts of...
We stop that and start the work.
Okay, so I welcome you, ma'am. I would like to introduce our resource persons also to you. We have 4 resource persons for this webinar today. Let me introduce our resource persons. Our first resource person is Madam Rita Panikkar. Rita Panikkar is the founder and director of Butterflies, working to protect and empower street and working children since 1989, which in 1999 received the Ramachandran Ikeda Award for following the Gandhian philosophy of education that emphasizes learning life skills. Ms. Rita Panikkar was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award in 2016 by National Association of Professional Social Workers in India. She has been a faculty member of Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai, and was also the founder member of Mashal, the Maharashtra Association for Social Housing. In 1990, Rita was appointed consultant to UNICEF New York and Nigeria to assist UNICEF Nigeria office to formulate a national policy and program for children, especially in difficult circumstances. Rita was elected to Ashoka Fellowship in 1993 and has authored several books on children's issues. She has published several papers on child rights issues and co-authored 2 studies, a study on children in conflict with law and a study on male sexual abuse in India. I welcome Rita ma'am to this webinar. Today, Ms. Rita Panikar shall be speaking on the impact of COVID-19 on street and working children. Our second resource person for the day is Mr. Aftab Mohammed. Aftab Mohammed is a child protection specialist with UNICEF. He is working on child protection and child rights issues for last 20 years. Aftab has completed his MA Social Work from Department of Social Work, Delhi University, and he has acquired LLB and LLM degrees. He was an international coach for 5 years under Child Protection in Emergency Coaching Scheme. Working with UNICEF has given Aftab a larger macro view of the issues concerning vulnerable children, and at the same time given him the opportunity to closely interact with grassroots organizations and various state bodies. I welcome you, Aftab Saab, to this webinar.
Thank you.
Our third resource person for the day is Dr. Kiran Modi. Kiran Modi is the founder and managing trustee of Udyan Care, a leading organization in the field of alternative care for vulnerable children. Dr. Kiran Modi started Udyan Care and the first Udyan Ghar for orphaned and abandoned children in Delhi, with a strong belief that every individual is a catalyst of change. A doctorate from IIT Delhi, Dr. Modi is a person of varied experience in several fields, including media, and has also been a founder member of several other trusts working for the disadvantaged. Udyan Care aims to bring sunshine into the lives of the underserved sections of the society. Starting with the establishment of just one small family home for orphaned and abandoned children in Delhi in 1996, Udyan Care has spread its work for disadvantaged groups during the last 25 years by establishing more family homes in 23 cities across 14 states and helping girls' education, providing vocational training. I welcome you, Dr. Kiran Modi, to this webinar today. Our fourth resource person is Mr. Prabhat Kumar. Prabhat is a National Thematic Manager, Prabhat is a National Thematic Manager, Child Protection with Save the Children. He has also served as the State Program Manager for Rajasthan and Bihar, and also was Project Director for the Anti-Child Labour Project in Punjab and Haryana. He has considerable experience and expertise in leading large and diverse teams in difficult environments. Prabhat is passionate facilitator for embedding child safeguarding protocols in institutions and has done so for various organizations, corporates, and institutions. He has been effective in engagement with government institutions, donor, consortium, interagency, and the media. We welcome you, Prabhat, to our webinar today. In this webinar, we have Professor Zubair Minai as the discussant. And Dr. Zubair Minai is a professor of social work in Jamia Millia Islamia and the honorary director of Center for Early Childhood Development and Research, where he has developed a program on child protection and set up a resource center on alternative care. He also facilitated University of Kashmir and Central University of Jammu to incorporate child protection in their MA Social Work curriculum. He has been a Fulbright Scholar in Residence at George Mason University, Virginia during 2015. Professor Minai is an active researcher, practitioner, and educator for last 25 years and has published several books and articles on various facets of social work. He is founder president of Indian Association for Social Work Education. He has also been the Dean Student Welfare of the university and has been on assignments to Lal Bahadur Shastri, National Academy of Administration, Mussoorie, and the World Bank Project on Rural Women's Empowerment and Development Project. Presently, he is engaged in developing standards and processes for alternative care in India and is a recipient of the Shastri Institutional Collaborative Research on Care Reforms in India, operationalizing the best interest of the child in the child protection decision-making system, along with Professor Christine Walsh of the University of Calgary, Canada. I welcome all the participants. VC ma'am, I would like to inform you that we have got participants all across India from almost all the central universities and state universities of various states. We have prominent universities like Delhi University, IP University, Lucknow University, BP Mahila Vishwavidyalaya. We have Central University of Himachal, Utkal University, Central University of Gujarat, IGNOU, and we have NGOs like Ashray Adhikar Abhiyan, SCAN, Teach India, Kailash Satyarthi, Children's Foundation, Caritas, and we have autonomous bodies like NIPSID, NCRT, NIMHANS, NEPA, and participants from all these organizations have registered for this webinar. And at the moment, we are streaming live on our YouTube channel and Facebook. So we are being heard by many people, more than how many have registered here. So I welcome all the participants who are all on these platforms for this webinar. Now I request our Vice Chancellor, Professor Najma Akhtar, to deliver the inaugural address. Ma'am, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That has to be confirmed first. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Professor Archana, for organizing this program. I'm so happy, but I hope students are also listening to this. Are you reaching out to students?
Yes, all the students, not only from Jamia, from all other universities, research scholars, MA students, everybody is a part of it.
Okay. Professor Archana, Professor Sajid Saab, I can see him also, and Dr. Rita Panikar, Dr. Aftab Mohammed, Dr. Kiran Modi, and Mr. Prabhat Kumar from Save the Children, and Professor Zubair Minai, and all others who are here participating in this program, all the speakers, all the those who are participants, and all. I also welcome all those who are not sitting here, not reaching out to this, but listening to it on various platforms. So it gives me a lot of pleasure to welcome you. I'm so happy that this program two university departments have come together to organize this webinar on an issue of great urgency. I'm also very happy that they have selected a panel consisting of best minds around the child. I'm impressed by the collection of speakers that you have just listed out. Friends, as we all know that children are one of the most vulnerable section of the society who are at constant risk of falling out of safety net. Emergency situations such as earthquake, floods, drought, pandemics, and armed conflicts expose the children to an increased risk of crisis, trauma, abuse, and abandonment. India has the highest child population. We can be happy about it, but we should also be worried about it. In the world, 430 million, out of which 40%, that is 170 million, are destitutes, and 12% are orphans having lost one or both the parents. This is the time when institutions like you or organizations like the who are participating and the government have to step in. This pandemic, which has affected all of us, has a discriminatory effect on children based on their identity, location, situation, and aggravating their vulnerabilities. COVID-19 pandemic has severely affected the children in educational, physical, social, and psychological aspects. Marginalized children are worth affected by the pandemic, considering their already existing already existing difficulty. Just let me put up my phone. We had on the TV and actually on the roads also seen how migration was going on because of COVID-19. So that is one issue which was never thought of in the beginning when the COVID-19 protocol came. But that has the biggest impact because COVID-19 pushed the government to impose lockdown in the month of March, which resulted in mass migration of daily wage workers and migrant laborers. This resulted in loss of income of the family and thus the child was severely affected. Families were not able to meet their nutritional needs of their children, even they were not able to get uh, food for the other members. So the children were definitely neglected during that period. An estimated 12.2 crore people have lost their jobs due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Almost 75% of the 12.2 crore people were small traders and wage laborers, as given in the India Today report. During this period, a new thing also came up, of which we were not ready at that before: online education. Due to the norms of social distancing, schools were shut, and most of the studies were shifted to online mode. Majority of children studying in state-owned schools belong to lower socio-economic strata of the society, and thus owning gadgets is kind of a dream for them. It was not possible for them to join the online education. Families with more than one child and one gadget only faces the additional burden. So due to this, many children could not keep the same pace as their peers, and once they come back, they'll be feeling left out in the class because they have not been following the online education. Another thing that needs to be pointed out was midday meal. And I'm sure all these things will be discussed in this program. But I feel that midday meal was one of the good initiatives of the government. Children were provided with nutritional food in the government schools and ICDS Anganwadis through the midday meal schemes, which have to be stopped due to pandemic. Almost 24 million children are at the risk of not returning to school next year due to economic fallout of COVID-19, according to United States policy brief on pandemic's impact on education, as given in the Hindu. But those who will come back and who ultimately have lost their nutrition, which was reaching out to them through midday meal, and they'll not be in very good health. According to the nutrition experts, for a large chunk of children of India, midday meal was the only source of nutrition in the day, and therefore the importance of midday meals for children cannot be undermined. And this is something which they have lost because they are not coming to school, and it's impossible for them to come to school when they are closed. In another webinar in Jamia, we had it exclusively on domestic violence. And it was highlighted that during the lockdown, domestic violence and child abuse is increasing. This lockdown has forced the people to stay at home, which resulted in the increase in the number of cases of domestic violence, which possess extreme harm to the psychological health of children. From March 25th to May, 31,000 complaints of domestic violence were made by women. This 68-day period recorded more complaints than those received between March and May in the previous 10 years, as reported in the Hindu. So this shows that when everybody is sitting at home and not doing anything, no earning, not enough food, the domestic violence increases. And as a result, the child is either abused also and also is psychologically traumatized during this period. I am trying to list out all the problems that I feel, but I'm sure we have experts here, so they'll be talking on them. Child labor is another problem. The COVID-19 pandemic is likely to push millions of children around the world into child labor. And those who are already employed as child labor will be forced to work longer hours and under worsening conditions, according to a news brief in the International Organization and UNICEF. We have UNICEF experts who will confirm this. The health system of the country was overburdened due to increasing number of cases of COVID-19, and therefore all the attention given to a child or to a child who needs who has some health issues were neglected, and these children were with health and because of the neglecting health service, the children are suffering because of that. UNICEF has warned that 3 lakh children could die in India over the next 6 months due to disrupted health services and surge in child wasting, which is a form of malnutrition, and when the child is too thin for his or her height. So these are very serious issues which are the add-ons to the life-threatening pandemic which is there. These are the side things which are coming in and need urgent attention of either the government and also of the organizations like those who have joined here and those who have not joined here but working in the area of child and betterment of child. Always, as always done, the child with special needs. The lockdown has taken a toll on the children with intellectual disabilities, parents, teachers, and caregivers on the socio-economic and psychological fronts. For the children with ID, social distancing also serves to separate them from their loved ones. Children with special needs also face difficulties in making and keeping the pace of study in the online mode of teaching, because online mode is finding it difficult to reach out to the child who is not a special child, but those who have special needs can get neglected because our teaching at present is not reaching out to the child with special needs. We did a very small study recently on child marriage, and the pandemic, it was found that the pandemic has also resulted in the spike in the number of cases of child marriage. The girls who are already considered burdened by the family suffers the most, as usual. Family wants to get rid of them or rid of the responsibility that the girls bring, and thus there is a spike in the number of cases of child marriages. We do need the helping hand. A number of organizations, the large-hearted people who have started this work and are going on now in a big way, are needed very much now, as never before. During the pandemic, a large number of organizations came together to help take care of many of the daily requirements of the common people. They are already doing it for saving the families and looking after their needs. But I am aware that the child-focused organizations like UNICEF, Butterflies, Uday and Care, and Save the Children have done exemplary work during the pandemic. And we are fortunate that we have their representatives talking to our students of social work and early childhood development about the issues and how to handle the problems. So I welcome you all the experts on this program, and I must say that I'm obliged that you have taken time off to not only to exchange your work that you have done, but also to reach out to my students who are not in front of you but are listening. I'm sure they are listening to this. And they are participating in this from outside this webinar. This is our way of teaching to them. What is being tried here is learning by listening. This is a very effective way for students learning by listening to those who have done it well. As we strengthen our mechanism for enhancing student learning, this exercise, the exercise of this webinar, and we can replicate it again and again and repeat it. This exercise should help the student learning, and that is which is being compromised as they cannot go to the field. Otherwise, they would have gone and actually seen it with their eyes how good work or what the needs are there. But now, since they are away from the field, this is the only way of learning for them, by listening to the good work being done. In the end, I congratulate both the departments for organizing this important webinar, and I hope that they shall collaborate further for more of such meaningful learning experiences. And in fact, I want all the other departments to see how this coming together of the departments can help the students from both the department and can add meaningful experiences in this learning exercise. So in the end, I congratulate the heads of both the departments and hope that this program goes on very well and is very useful. I hope it is, with the permission of everybody, you should record it and keep on sending it to your students or make it available to your students so that they can do the learning whenever they are free. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for flagging and highlighting the pertinent issues related to children in general and the marginalized children in particular. I thank you for addressing this webinar. And with that, and with your permission, we move on to our expert panel. May I request Madam Rita Panikar to start with her session. Over to Rita, Madam, please. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning.
I will be listening to one of them. Please.
Yes, good morning. I would be, with your permission, switching off my video camera as my internet connection is very weak. Okay? I hope that's not a problem.
No, not at all.
Okay. Good morning, respected Professor Najma Akhtar, Vice Chancellor, Professor Archana Dasi, and Professor Zubair Minai, my co-panelists, Dr. Karan Modi, Mr. Aftab Mohammed, Mr. Prabhat Kumar, the faculty members of the various schools of social work, the practitioners, and the students. I must thank you, Jamia Millia Islamia, the Department of Social Work and Early Childhood Care, for inviting all of us to share our thoughts on the subject. I think the Professor Najma Akhtar did put in her keynote address, did put across a number of issues which are actually something that everyone is grappling with. To reiterate, I would say that the impact of the pandemic brought out the fault lines that exist in our society very sharply. The unprecedented hardships faced by the marginalized, the migrant casual daily wages, was intensified because of the existing vulnerabilities, especially the children and their families that live in street situations. Although this existed for years, but the pandemic really brought out these fault lines very sharply. It is estimated by the United Nations estimations that 42 to 66 million children could fall into extreme poverty as a result of the COVID-19 this year, adding to the estimated, I would say, 386 million children already in extreme poverty in 2019. And we as practitioners are witnessing this on the ground with children and families we work with. The impact has been tremendous. Adolescents who were living independently on the streets, which is 9% of the total population, did not have any proper safe place to sleep. And so the question of physical distancing did not arise. Most of these adolescents could not go back to their home states. They lost their work as all shops shuttered down. Those who picked scraps could not do it anymore as there were no scraps left and they couldn't wander around. Interestingly, there were no temporary special shelters only for children in the city during this lockdown period and pandemic, especially when schools were being used to house the shelterless adults. There weren't any for children. There were some shelters for children, but they were way out. Like the children would have to go walk about 5 kilometers to reach these shelters, which were especially for children, and they were anyway overcrowded. Situation of children from the street-connected families were not any better. The only difference and the major difference was that the children were living with their families, so they had that emotional support. And from them, when we did an assessment, we found 50% of these families lived in rented rooms in slums, and they were in major distress because they were unable to pay their rents. And so a number of them moved to temporary shelters or onto the pavements. The parents lost their jobs during the lockdown period. In fact, 71% of the parents have not been able to get back their previous jobs or any other job for that matter. Several families decided to leave the city and migrated back to their villages. Several families had no official documentation. Now, this is another major false line. No documentation such as Aadhaar cards and ration cards, and therefore made it difficult to get the dry rations that were distributed by the government. And we had to facilitate to get them these e-coupons. The whole economic distress created fears and anxieties about the future and led to arguments between parents, which again led to building emotional stress among the children because of their insecurity about their future. For children, the pandemic and lockdown resulted in absence of a daily routine, loss of classroom learning activities, loss of exposure to outside space for play and connecting with their friends. They were also anxious about their future if they will be able to go back to school. Initially, what we did was to explain to the children and families about coronavirus because a lot of fake news was going around. And the importance of hand washing, wearing your mask, physical distancing, which is well said, but when you're in a crowded area, how do you physically distance yourself? But most importantly, to tell the parents to have conversations with their children and reassure them as to why they are facing all these difficulties. That was very important. Prior to the government even putting their act together, a number of our NGOs, we started the relief serving cooked meals to children and families. During the lockdown, every shop and eateries, that is even the smallest small dabas, were shuttered. And therefore, getting a meal for the children and adolescents was a challenge. Even for that matter, mosques and temples were out of bounds. So earlier, at least you could go there and get some food, but that was also not there. Gurudwaras were shuttered. You couldn't go there. So after the cooked meals, the bottles, water, fruit, these things actually help the children to tide over their hunger. Later, of course, ration kits were given, personal hygiene kits were given, along with masks and sanitary napkins for girls and women. But all this happened because there were a number of civil society organizations out there to do this before even the government put their act together. Everyone, including the government, were unprepared for unprecedented distress the citizens would face upon the lockdown was imposed, especially the poor. There was no plan in place. to map areas and population that were most vulnerable and required assistance even after a month. The other is that the impact of this on the learnings for children. This has been a major challenge. Over the last 6 months, according to the report of UNICEF, which was released just about 2 days ago, said that 1.5 billion children around the world had been asked to stay at home, and more than 30% of these students, around 463 million, are unable to access remote learning opportunities. It's the same in India. It has impacted 247 million children who are enrolled in schools in elementary and secondary, and 28 million who are preschoolers who cannot access it. In the closure of the formal schools has negatively impacted the children of marginalized and disadvantaged groups of people because it has interrupted learning. And the disadvantages are disproportionate for first generation learners who tend to have fewer educational opportunities beyond the school. Midday meals, which was flagged by Professor Najma Akhtar, that was another saving, a lifeline for these children. So what happened to the midday meals? The schools were serving meals for everybody who was hungry. So some of the children complained that they got very little food at the end because they were in the line too. The parents were unprepared for internet learning and homeschooling, obviously. Unequal access to digital learning. One smartphone in a family and a number of children, whom do you give it to? That couldn't happen. And so sharing of the smartphones within the neighborhood children, which we had organized a cooperative learning, that could take place. Children were sharing their smartphones and their lessons. But otherwise, it would have been disastrous. There were gaps in the childcare. Anganwadi's creches were not working. And therefore, the children did not receive the nutrition. As an alternative, the Anganwadi workers would handed over the ration of food kits to the families registered with them. But this did not come. It came as an afterthought after 2 months or more. The immunization program also came to a standstill. The dropout rates may rise. It is a challenge to ensure children and adolescents return and stay in school. And I think that will be a major challenge for all of us. Social isolation, yes, children are grappling with that. The other things that happened was that the children were not getting their textbooks, so when the teacher was teaching something, they didn't know what to refer to. So we had to give them an access to NCERT books through the videos. We had to give them the links of these various channels. But then this is all challenging for a child who's living on the street or in night shelters or in slums. Where do you get the access to all these things? It is a major challenge, and we think that the learning levels of these children would have dropped considerably in these last 5-6 months. What we did was to engage children in art and craft activities, apart from helping them with their studies. Because it was important to address their frustration and their stress and their emotional well-being. And we felt that if we organize some creative activities like drawing, painting, story writing, essay writing, and celebrations of special days, it would engage children and keep them away from frustrations. The other major, so one, you had a distress when it came to a loss of money, economy, and food, and a space to stay. That was a major thing. Then came in learning. The schools was another area that caused a lot of distress for the children. And all that had a bearing or impacted the social emotional well-being of children. In fact, when we were conducting telephonic casework sessions with these children, they were saying many things to us, which was more of stress and anxiety about the future. Most of them were worried about the loss of their household income and financial crisis of the family. They shared that they wondered if they would be able to go back to school. So we did have these telephonic casework sessions, but I must say that telephonic counseling or casework doesn't work that well as face-to-face would do, because there is no privacy and for children to share things because they are at home, they can't go out. There is a discomfort level, and children need a human being sitting in front of them. It's important for them to have that physical contact. They miss their school, they miss their friends, their teachers, government, and tell them that to go out and face an essential service for children. So I thought that was amusing, but of course I didn't write that mail. But the kids really wanted to interact and be with each other. The adolescents who were working and stayed alone in Delhi missed their home and their family, and they really wanted to go back home. But that became a major challenge. Most of them could not go back, and they only went back much, much later. Children's time schedules have changed. They have started going to sleep late because they have to finish their homework. They get their mobile phones from their parents late at night, so they're sitting and working on their homework or using the TV to study. So all this disrupted their daily routine. And the children were complaining of headaches and eye pain and body pain. But in all this, I must say, that there was a family bonding and communications were also reported that it was improved in a significant number of children. Our social workers encourage parents to have informal conversations with children. And children later mentioned that they got to know their parents better. They did not realize how much their parents cared for them because always the parents are only kind of disciplining them. But for once they were able to talk to them and share their life stories too. And this time of being together, although it was ridden with anxiety, stress, argument, irritation, anger among parents and children, it also resulted in moments of bonding of the family members. I would like to say that these are all the issues that one has tabled, but what is the way forward? The way forward, I see it as it should be a systemic approach. There has to be a continuum of care. While working with children and families, there is a disconnect between the agencies that are part of the socio-ecological system meant to care and protect children. We work with children, families, communities, schools, and government agencies as separate entities, but not as holistic ecosystem. All the agencies, both CSOs and government, come into action after a family has dissolved due to multiple factors such as economic distress, poor health, violence, caste, and ethnic discrimination, lack of documentation, and therefore inability to access welfare schemes, exclusiveness in schools that keep or push out children from schools. The focus and resources should be targeted on how to support the family and make it sustainable and viable and not wait for its collapse to get into action. There must be a systems approach wherein all the agencies and stakeholders come together to prevent this collapse. This is the way forward. And like I mentioned in the beginning, all the fault lines of the inequities in our society has become very stark during this pandemic. One of the most important strategies would be to see that every citizen gets their formal documentation papers such as Aadhaar and ration card. The urban as well as the rural poor should be made aware of the various social and welfare schemes available for them. There are 14 schemes, by the way, for urban poor in Delhi, which are meant for their health, nutrition, scholarship for children, family support, care and protection, housing, and livelihood. However, none of these schemes were implemented during this crisis, and of course, majority would not have benefited from it as they have no legal documentation to prove their residents of this city. There has also to be a continuum of care for children, beginning from families, their community, and schools. I would say that the schools are the other important agency that needs to go beyond academics to making schools a caring and protective space for children. This can result in qualitative involvement of parents, community members, and school teachers in resolving issues of conflict and improving the emotional well-being of children and the support system. Our work with children and families in communities and schools will be incomplete without social casework. It is integral to the well-being of the person. We recognize that the most crucial factor in keeping a family together and the child not losing family care was emotional well-being of a child and of the family itself. Emotional well-being translates into positive social relationships, ability to solve problems, and wherever necessary, make the personal and environmental changes. Mental health, or as we call it, emotional health interventions, does not work in a silo, but should be part of all our work with children, parents, or communities. There are a number of studies that have proven family is the most crucial social unit that needs strengthening if children must grow up to be emotionally well, self-confident, and make informed choices and the ability to resolve conflicts. And here I would also like to request the schools of social work to please bring back social casework and group work in the center of your social work education. I think mental health is an issue that we really need to be addressing in our society. It is a public health issue. It's not just mental disorder. We need emotional well-being too to be addressed. To conclude, I would like to emphasize that we should have a systemic approach while working with the most marginalized communities rather than in silos. And along with the fundamental rights of education, play, healthcare, right to family, housing, protection from violence and exploitation for the children, there is also the need to emphasize on emotional well-being of a child. And this is more so today as we are living in such uncertain times with less social interactions and more in the virtual world, where the boundaries are rewritten or erased every now and then, and what is acceptable or unacceptable, fake and truth, all this is being shifted, and that will adversely impact on the emotions of children. Thank you. I hope I get my time.
Thank you, Rita ji. Yes, we actually forgot to look at the time, although you were sticking to the time, and very interesting. You have really put forward the situational analysis of the children who are really vulnerable on the street and who are working children. And yes, systemic approach, which is considered to be the most comprehensive approach, is something which is need of the hour. And I would like to hear, tell you that in Jamia, the social work department has social casework as one of the important core papers, which is being taught to all the MA social work students. So that's something where we have realized this need, and hence both social casework as well as social group work are there. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rita. So from here, I move on to our next speaker, Mr. Aftab Mohammed. Aftab Sahab is working with UNICEF, and they have been doing a lot of substantial work with children of migrant workers. So over to you, Aftab Sahab.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so I'm going to speak on migrants and children on the move in the age of COVID and how the pandemic is impacting them and what are the ways forward, what together we can do. So Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Nazma Akhtar, Dr. Archana Dasi, Head of Department Social Work, Jamia Millia Islamia, Dr. Minai, Director Early Childhood Development Center and Research Center, dear students, a warm greeting to all of you. It's really my pleasure to be with the social work educators, practitioners, and the student community to talk about these issues. Thank you, Jamia, for organizing these important discussions, because even during pandemic, COVID crisis, among the academicians, often we forget children. So thanks for including and deliberating and bringing up the children agenda through this webinar. I'm not going to kill you with yet another PowerPoint presentation, as it often happens. Rather, I would like to talk this through and share some practitioner's perspective on this issue. Without further ado, let me get into the topic I am supposed to, and here I give you an overview helicopter view. As we all know, it will be a repetition. Some of the things Rita has already covered, and very well the Vice Chancellor in her keynote address, some of the things she has put in the perspective. Nonetheless, let me get you back and you remind and see the picture in your mind what you have shown on the television screens, newspaper, or on social media. How just after lockdown, millions of the people really get back to their native place. UP alone, around 3.5 million people, as per the report, there may be more than that, have come back to their native place. Many of the workers were left stranded across the country. Migrants were forced to stay where they were, have just jobs, do not have jobs, do not have money, food, are compelled to back their home. Visual of pregnant women, little children, people atop of the good trucks, those who don't get the transport walk through their homes without food, water, or some of them have even not footwear. While they were walking to their homes or in trucks, many of them lost their life in the road accident, as we have seen. Nonetheless, the image of a child on a suitcase of a mother and mother was pulling it all along the way will haunt the conscience of the nations for a long time. Those somehow reached home, were hungry, exhausted, without cash, and we are not very sure what the future looks ahead for them. That's the context we are coming from. That's the things we have seen. And it has not yet over for them. It's still continues for almost for last 5 to 6 months. Just to give you some numbers to see the things in perspective, some of the things Rita has already said in her address. The World Bank suggests that the COVID will push some around 40 to 60 million people into extreme poverty, forecasting stark economic consequences. And just yesterday, you may have seen the newspaper how, because of this COVID, our own economy is on track. And it will have obvious impact on the family and the children. The ILO estimated a rise of global unemployment. About 1.25 billion workers, or around 38% of the global workforce, are employed in the sector, are high risk of the workforce displacement. That's the number we are doing at global level. And we, as a country like India, we are no different. And the pandemic has affected the school of 1.5 billion students worldwide. In our own country, millions of children are missing out on education. And the Vice Chancellor has already addressed in her keynote. Since I come from the child protection practitioners community, so I will talk more about the practice. So these are the just broad picture. Let's zoom in and see how this apparently a health crisis turned into humanitarian crisis with huge economic social impact, which will further push the children at risk and at margin. And to begin with, as I said, I am a practitioner. I would like to share 3 case stories which will give you the perspective. These used as illustrations. These case studies, here it goes. 19-year-old Raju and his younger siblings was living in Yamuna Park in Delhi with his parents. To supplement the family income and support of his family education, Raju was working in a garage, car cleaning center. After lockdown, all 5 members of his family had to return to his native village in Ghazipur district in UP. So keep the story of Raju in your mind when we go ahead. The another illustrations, Shams, Javed, and Shanu, of age 17 years, 15 years, all are brothers, siblings. working in a Zari factory in Dharavi in Mumbai. After lockdown, they stuck there for almost 3 months. And in the month of May, somehow, they managed to get back to their home in Bahraj. At home, physically impaired father who is on bedridden, and mother with two other younger sisters in the house. The third illustrations, Kavita, Rani, Raghav, and Abhishek. Kavita, Rani, Raghav, and Abhishek all are below 18 years in Bundelkhand region. Living there with their grandparents, they are very happy after almost a year. Their parents have come back from Surat. They were working in Surat. They are happy that almost after a year, parents have come back. But they can see a sign of worry in their mother, parents, grandparents. They don't really able to figure out what they are going to happen to them. So these are the situations I have given you, 3 different situations, how this migrant lockdown or this pandemic has really impacted children and their families. In the first family of Raju, who was working, their both children, younger children, our siblings were going to school. They are no longer in school, so they are out of school. They come back to Ghazipur. For last 4 years, they were not coming to their home. So because of this pandemic, they are forced. And they didn't have so much money to maintain 2 houses. So what their house and the native village are in depleted situations. And when the monsoon happened, you can understand the kind of difficulties and hardships Raju and his family have gone through or going through. In the same way, Shams, Javed, and Shanu, who were working, and as we know, the remittance is very important for the family back at home. Because of their earning, father is bedridden, mother and 2 younger siblings, sisters are there. Now they have no jobs. They are at home. They don't know when they will go back to Mumbai. So they are in that situation. Same way Kavita, Rani, Raghav, and Abhishek is also going through. Here also, both parents were sending. They were left behind with their grandparents, they were living. Parents were sending remittances, their houses, their school. All 3 were going to school. All 4 of the siblings were going to schools. Now schools are closed. Parents are at home. In response to that, what has been so far the response from the government and from the state? They have some announcement, 1,000 rupees per family, all those who are the migrants will be transferred in their accounts. As Rita said, that many of those people who come from this state of society, they don't have the documentation. They don't have the bank accounts, so it's very difficult. In case of Shams and his family, they don't have any accounts so far. So where the money will go, the first struggler to get the open your account there. And it happened. After that, public service, public distributions, it was that the ration will be provided to them. Somehow they are getting in all these 3 cases. But the other additional expenditures, where it will come. And how this going to impact the dimension of this impact of the whole 3 case studies I've said. If we summarize, UN in a report grouped all the impact of children in generally 4 dimensions. They grouped it. First dimension is the poverty, how this pandemic is going to cause poverty. Other dimension of risk are survival and health. Third dimension is learning, schooling, learning. Fourth, but very important, and which I come from my practice, is safety and protection. These are the 4 dimensions of the risk for children because of this pandemic. And this pandemic has exacerbated pre-existing vulnerabilities, as we have seen in the case of all 3 cases, to access to service, meaning migrant and children on the move will be disproportionately affected and suffer during and after this public health crisis. And what will happen to those children and what are happening to those children? As Vice Chancellor has said, there is a spike in child marriages there are already micro studies and the data are coming up that there are spikes in the child marriages. Very recently, just 2 weeks back in Gorakhpur, a bus was stopped, intercepted by the police, anti-human trafficking unit, where girls, mainly girls from Bihar, were taken away to the other city, and they had been rescued. So they were the victim of trafficking. There is also a spike in the child labor already. Now the Shams, those who were working, or the Raju or their siblings, they were going to school in Jamnapar in Delhi. Now they are at home. Most likely, if any support is not provided, they will go to get into the labor. Two other things, we talked about the digital things. Now, at least for those not, this is a big digital divide, especially for those who come from the poor family, they don't have the gadgets, telephone, internet access. But for those, even somehow they manage, there is exposure to the whole online things out there. They don't know, they don't have agency, they don't have a skills, they don't have the knowledge how to protect them from online exposures, which can put them in danger. And we all know what could be the danger look like. In case of sexual violence and domestic violence, we all from other countries and India also micro studies are there, data are coming up. In UP, we don't have a comparable data. We can say with full confidence how much increase, but there are certain increase visibly or risk of increase in sexual violence and domestic violence, particularly against girls, boys as well are at risk, but women also. Children with disability, Madam has already talked about, but here I also bring to another layer. Children who are living with a disabled person, like in case of Shams, they are not person with disability, but his father is a person with disabilities, bedridden, and their situation will be much more hardship they are going to face. So these are some of the categories of children and some of the issues, child protection issues are emerging. Now in these situations, what will be our response? Let's come to the first, human trafficking, child labor. In human trafficking and child labor here, because the educators as well as practitioners are also there. Many a times, the whole focus on the combating human trafficking, they put the police in the center. I'm not saying they are not important, but what I am emphasizing here, it's very important to see the other actors and the reason behind the trafficking. Trafficking is not just a law and order and criminality. It's exaggerated because of the poverty, inequalities, discriminations. We need to address this first. Just training of police officers, better law enforcement is not going to solve this problem. Just 2 weeks back, when intercepted in Gorakhpur, they may turn that some other route they will take. Instead of Gorakhpur, they will go by Kathiawar to the Kolkata and from Kolkata to other routes. So how many police personnel we will put to prevent all those things? So it's very important to find out a model where a comprehensive model could be integrated model where linkages and access to social protection schemes to the families like Shams, Raju, and Kavita, they're able to get. So their vulnerability, as we know that many industries now slowly opening up, there is a scarcity of labor at this point of time. You might have heard the news that from Telangana, our industry has sent a special bus in Khagaria district in Bihar to recruit the labor to bring them back to Telangana. They are highly unlikelihood they will allure children, those who have been already in the market working, and the new adolescent girls and boys, those who are in the threshold 15 years, 16 years, 17 years old. They may allure them, and they will be the new victims of this human trafficking and child labor nexus. Now coming to the child marriage, often we also talk about the reinforcement for prohibitions of Child Marriage Act. We know child marriage is a social norms issue. This cannot be simply dealt with the police. In UP alone, 2.8 million child marriages happen. How come we can able to file FIR on all those people? That will be not possible that to put the so many large people behind the bar. So we have to find, hello, can you hear me? So we have to find the ways and means to deal with these things, and role of behavioral change communications, role of faith-based leaders, community leaders, youth groups like NCC, NSS, NYK, Yuva Mangal Dal, these kind of youth, all those need to be mobilized to prevention of child marriages, not just alone. On the online safety, it's very important. It's a hard time. We should not really push under the carpet, but it's high time to educate our children and parents as well. What the measures they can take to protect their own children from unnecessary exposure or harmful exposure to online. What are the ways and means for these preventions? How we can really educate our own children to really take care and to be aware about the harms it may cause to them. There are also lots there on the online, which is very good for them. They can get educations and they are getting in some cases, but there are many other things which could really harmful for them. So these are the issues we have to take care about how to go about these things. Other things in a big way it's coming up, and Rita has also talked about psychosocial well-being. Look at the situation of Raju and his 3 siblings. Same with Kavita and his other 3 siblings, sons and his 2 siblings. They all may be in the crisis. Is there someone to go and talk to him? Do we have the system? Do we have the mechanism? Do we have the enough trained mental health professionals, mental health and psychosocial support persons? Just for the basic things. Do we have the linkages if those who really require the secondary or tertiary level of interventions do have the referral mechanism in place? These are the questions we need to ask and put the system in place. It's very important in time of this trauma, in crisis, somebody and system, and especially social workers, need to reach out to those children in rural areas as well. Of course, because of this pandemic, following the social norms, travel restrictions, many a times face-to-face counseling, which is ideal, may not be possible. But we need to find out the ways and means in different ways. It may be not ideal, but how through more training, better research, we can have at least some good services, quality services to those children, mental health and psychosocial services to those children. It's very important. Now coming out to this, because we are talking to a social work educators, thought leaders, we are talking to the many distinguished professors out there I could see. In this whole process, these are the issues we all know by now, how pandemic has occurred, but what the whole social work community can do, what's there, and especially university and academia can do. And that's the question I think we should ask today. Can social work department of Jamia Millia Islamia, Early Child Center, or many other departments who are there, can come up with the models that how to improve the case management system online, because it is going to, whether we like it or not, for some time it's going to be the norms. How best we able to do? how best we can train our mental health and psychosocial care workers. All three levels, one that those who are working at the first level, secondary level, tertiary level, how we can train them, equip them. What will be the ways and do's and don'ts for them? What will be the method of social work interventions in this whole way? What will be the handbook or any primer for them? Whether it will be a case work, group work, community work, social action, social research, maybe all of them in integrated approach. Other important which we often ignore, and here the role of the Department of Social Work and the institute like this can be, and you can take lead. We all know that social service workforce, social work workforce in the government system and non-governmental systems, they are also stressed out. Their well-being is also very important. If we don't really give attention to their well-being, what could be the model for their well-being? What can be done? How we can check their stress level? What will be the checklist? How we can provide support to them? Is there something our own indigenous knowledge we can build around for the well-being of our social welfare work, social service workforce in India? How to working with particularly the vulnerable families I'm talking about. Now the block placement, your field work is not going to take place as it used to be. Maybe class may resume online. But what will be the ways, new innovative ways, social work educators and department can think about for the field work and the block placement of their students? This is an immense opportunity of learning for the students and the research opportunities for the teachers and the educators to come up. How to best they can claim their space in this whole process in response to the COVID crisis. More than that, whatever we are doing, remember the face of Raju, Kavita, and Shams. Somewhere they are waiting for the professional social workers to intervene, to make their voice. Because social workers has that skills. They are trained in that way to keep them safe. Question is, are we ready for them? Are we there or not? If not, what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Aftab. You have raised all the issues which were faced by children in rural areas, especially with reference to Uttar Pradesh during COVID-19 pandemic, and what all have they really gone through, and the kind of vulnerabilities which have been there. And yes, thank you for highlighting and asking the role of social workers, that what professional social workers can do. I think this is a very pertinent question, and there are so many people who are in the audience, both professional social workers, but people from education who are here, who are struggling with that, how to take the children back into the loop, and what is the best which can be done for the children. Thank you so much. Thank you. With this, we move on to our next expert, and that is Dr. Kiran Modi. Dr. Kiran Modi has been associated with working with the institutionalized children, and deliver your talk. Yes, Kiranji.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude for Jamia Millia complete distinguished faculty, Vice Chancellor Madam Najma Akhtarji, Professor Zubair Minai, Professor Archana Dasi, and all the other distinguished faculty, research scholars, social work students, and my co-panelists. I'm really, very excited in coming here, and it gave me an opportunity to hear my co-panelists. It was really good. And I know Aftab Bhai I know, Aftab bhai, you don't like PowerPoint presentations, but since I have worked so hard on it, please allow me to present. Is that all right?
Yes, yes. Please go ahead, madam.
I don't know who is presenting.
Please go.
Kankita Lashkar. Can you please stop your presentation? Then only I can present. Can you please stop your presentation?
Please stop presenting. Kankita, please stop presenting.
I think by mistake she has done this.
Kankita is here in the audience.
Can you
Otherwise,
Okay.
I have to remove you there.
Right, okay, now it
So
is
she is
okay.
there. Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I will just do it. So you've heard, all my distinguished co-panelists, and they have spoken so wonderfully about different issues that are assailing our society. Oh, I don't know if this is gone. Just give me 1 minute, please.
Yeah.
Again, can you see my screen? This is the.
No.
I don't know what's happening here. Anyway, I will continue to try, and I can start speaking. If you look at it, the situation of children who are living in CCIs, we need to understand their context. All of us are aware of. I don't know. Are you able to hear me? Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, something has gone wrong here.
Yes,
so
we
I-
can hear you.
All
Yes,
right.
we can hear you.
Okay, so there is, everyone is aware of this 2018 MWCD mapping report, which talks about 3.7 lakh children living in about 9,500 CCIs. So it is a huge number of children who are in CCIs. So while, migrant children and children on the street and rural children, all the children are as important, these children also need to be looked into the kind of crises they are facing. If you look at it in our country, even though foster care and adoption, all these things are on the rise, but most of the children without parental care, institutional care is the only care option. Most of the CCIs in India are overcrowded, where maintaining social distancing is so difficult. Often children who are living in CCIs, they come with existing health issues and lack of availability of quality healthcare services. Their health does not really improve very much. And in those situations when the
Can you make your presentation full screen? Kiran, can you make your presentation full screen? Full screen.
Good morning, ma'am. Kiran ma'am, I have presented the screen for you.
No, just leave it. I will just try again. I don't know. Okay, you can do that.
Yeah, this is fine. Even this is fine. Just full screen कर दीजिए उसको. Ujala Arora is presenting. Just full screen कर दीजिए.
So, Ujala, have you made the full screen? I
Yes,
can't
ma'am.
see. Okay, all right. No, I can't see. Something has gone wrong with my Google Meet. Anyway, I'll continue to speak. So if you, so
Kiran,
the,
we can see your presentation.
It is on full screen, Kiran. It's fine.
There are some network issues which Kiran is facing. I think by the time she joins, we can ask our next expert to join us. Prabhat. Mr. Prabhat Kumar is from Save the Children Fund, and he's a specialist in child protection. I'll request Prabhat to deliver his talk and share his experiences about working with children who are living in slums and the homeless children. Over to you, Prabhat.
Thank you so much. So I'll just maybe show my picture and then I'll turn off the video to save the bandwidth. So very good afternoon, and I'm very pleased to be here, and many thanks to you, Professor Archana ji, Professor Jovel Minai, and it was good listening to Dr. Rita Panikar, my dear friend, Mr. Aftab, and Kiranji. I was waiting to hear from him and will soon hear from her. So I'll just be focusing largely on slum and the problem of children living, or we call it urban deprived children. So street children, living in slums and homelessness are more or less same. So I'll not say the points again that Dr. Rita ji has already covered, but I'll try to focus more on slum and particularly homelessness and what is it that adds more to the vulnerability or marginalization of children living in slum area or the families living in slum area. So I'll just take risk to show one slide if that works, and it's not PowerPoint presentation. So if people can look at this slide.
No, not yet.
Okay, so no problem. I'll share this slide. I could not send in advance, but I'll share what this slide says. It shows the picture of Mumbai city, and then there is Dharavi slum, and then the skyscrapers, and the life expectancy of those slum are 39 years, whereas in skyscrapers the life expectancy is 69 years, which is actually the Indian paradox, and how the financial capital of India, the death rates almost double for people who are living in the slums or people who are deprived. So I'll also tell you a few data or work that we have done to understand what was situation of urban homelessness first. So let me tell you, none of these marginalization that we are talking about is new. I gave you example of this life expectancy in a slum and then skyscraper. So that's not new. Only thing that COVID has done or COVID-19 has done is it has exposed or it has put forth what vulnerability existed. So when we talk about what future actions, I'll talk about how we should not repeat same mistakes in future. So there are roughly around 2 million homeless population or people who live in homelessness, and almost 37 to 40% of total urban population lives in slums. So it's not a small area that we are talking about. So mainly in terms of vulnerability, we heard about when we heard what the migrants or children living in state situation was facing the problem, and how some of the guidelines, policies that come up in disaster sometimes are not very equitable, and they discriminate or they don't consider everyone. So if I was to talk about that, the social distancing, isolation or quarantining. So this was key thing which was focused, especially in initial phase and even now to some extent. But for a homeless population or people living in slum area, it's a distinct dream. So they cannot, the space, the area that is available, they cannot actually afford to do this. Even some of these are impossible there. So there was policy around home quarantining, and so the children who or the families who are homeless, they were left on the street. There were also cases we heard where there are public toilets and water facility that is available, which is chargeable sometime, and then homeless people, because they did not have any money to pay, and then they were asked to pay for certain things which should actually have been, because we talk about universal coverage, and they should come as free of cost. And there is one thing that people have seen very recently is, and this was already there, but it has exacerbated, is the kind of abuse, violence, harassment that homeless people or people living in slum area faced during lockdown and even now. And there is greater anxiety and stress that people are facing, and then they don't know what to do. And the psychosocial counseling that we talk about, the remote reach is many times limited only to people who are people who can afford to reach, who are aware about it. Things have gone digital. The digital penetration in this area is very poor. So when now the total COVID cases has crossed roughly 3 million, but when it was roughly around 1 million, we had seen that 10 cities that contribute to half of COVID cases across country were the cities which has largest population of slums and homelessness. When we reviewed the guidelines, the package that government is announcing for the vulnerable or marginalized people, there only 15 states had food provision, where they mentioned that the food provision should be made available to homeless people. None of them mentioned about the cash transfer to homeless people. There were no specific social security scheme. And then people have already spoken in normal time also, it's challenged. The universal coverage of schemes like Anganwadi center was not working, the schools were not there. So these are challenges that people face. To some extent, two things that slightly worked, and when we spoke to people in slum or many homeless people, roughly half of them had access to the food and access to the sanitation facilities. And that is where, so these were problems that these section of population were facing. We also try to understand what is needed. So one, of course, is, and this has been advocated and this is being spoken about, is the universal provision of public distribution system and dry ration to homelessness. But many of them don't even have a space to cook or the essential requirements or utensils required to cook. So there should also be provision of cooked food for short term, at least for the homeless population. Like I said, sanitation was to some extent provided, but the water for cleaning, washing, the availability of masks, soap, sanitizer, these were missing. Again, on home quarantining and medical checkup, there were guidelines that they will be provided with the medical kits which did not reach them. So the guideline should be, if there are people who are homeless, the quarantining facility for them, they should not be left to street, but it should actually be institutionalized where they can really be self quarantine, or the provision of drop-in and temporary shelter is one of important needs which has always come out for the urban homelessness, but this again remains a distant reality. And with the target of housing for all by 2022, I think in short term and long term as well, there the provision for temporary shelter and also provision for the home for homelessness, so that they also have housing, that should be considered. the free water and toilet is something I have mentioned, and then we also wrote one paper where we deliberated on. So these things that I mentioned: universal provision of cooked food, PDS, sanitation, the temporary shelters, free water, toilet, or public utilities. So the government can even, because they are captured in census, government can even consider issuing a sort of a smart card where they can, through that smart card itself, they can access all the services that is meant for them. Three important things that we must consider in short and medium term is: one, like I said, there is a big level of stigma and anxiety, stress that has been reported. So if we can ensure that there is provision of psychosocial counseling support, and not the remote one or digital one, something that they can access with some level of confidence. The livelihood opportunity needs to be ensured, because National Urban Livelihood Mission is one which has been given mandate to work or enhance the vulnerabilities that homeless people face, and the policy for homelessness needs to be there in all the cities. And every program policy that we have, it is, since I am speaking largely about homelessness and the urban slums, but I would say that every policy that we make, be it on street children or if there are policies related to social security code, occupational safety and health code, needs to be seen from disaster and resilient lens. So that's important. I would again focus when Dr. Rita and Dr. Aftab spoke about the digital divide. So I would say that for people living in slum and homeless people, there should be community-led models of equitable and quality teaching learning practices that exist. So this digital thing will not instantly work. Maybe in long run it will work. So with that, I stop and thank you so much.
Unfortunately, our fourth expert has still not joined. So we move on to. Yes.
Ma'am, actually, Kiran ma'am is facing a network issue. So I have Miss Leena Prasad, who is heading the advocacy department. So she will be presenting on her behalf.
Who will be presenting? You?
No, Miss Leena Prasad. She is the head of the.
Leena Prasad would be presenting. Is Leena Prasad on the panel? Is she among the audience?
Yes, ma'am, I'm there.
Welcome, Leena. Welcome, Leena, to this webinar. Please share your views and your experiences related to COVID-19 pandemic with the institutionalized children. Leena, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Archana Dasi, and a warm welcome to all the co-panelists and the VC ma'am. It's difficult replacing Kiran ma'am at the last moment, but nonetheless, I'll try my best. Thank you for the opportunity. Can you hear me and can you see my screen?
Yes. We can hear you, and even the screen is visible. Please start.
Is the screen full screen?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So I will start. So I think it was lovely listening to all the other co-panelists, and Dr. Modi had to present particularly of keeping the focus of children who reside in childcare institutions. So I think she had begun by saying that the recent Jena committee report that had come out in 2018 and was the first mapping exercise that was conducted by the Ministry of Women and Child Development in 2018 had recorded about 3.7 lakh children who were staying in about 9,500 childcare institutions in India. And as we know, most of the children who stay in these kind of institutional care are children without parental care. And though the JJ laws, have a spirit of saying that institutional care should be the last resort, Unfortunately, the reality on the ground is that, institutional care is the most preferred form of alternative care, because adoptions and foster care, kinship care, these forms of alternative care are really not happening on the ground. There is a lack of understanding amongst all stakeholders, and the non-institutional approach to caring for children without parental care is very poor in India. We also know the reality that most childcare institutions in the country are overcrowded. Under the juvenile justice laws, there are sanctions that a children's home will have, this limited number of children to be staying there. But because of the challenges we have in the country, most institutions are found to be keeping children beyond the sanction strength. And in such overcrowded situations, maintaining physical and social distancing was a real challenge. Often we see that, children who come to live in institutional care already have existing health issues. They, they lack services of quality care, and the hygiene standards are often below standards. Infrastructural factors do reduce the challenge to wash hands adequately and frequently, and the understanding and use of hand sanitizers also is often found absent. Children who live in childcare institutions will have to keep in mind that they already have experiences of early childhood adverse experiences. They have suffered trauma. Often they would have seen, death in the family, or have suffered abuse, because of which they already, are almost vulnerable. And then in situations of a pandemic, all of this only gets exacerbated. Preventive awareness programs around the pandemic, we found that they were not tailored to the unique needs of these children. And this includes children who are living in the institutions with special needs and different abilities. And therefore, it impacted their psychosocial health issues, including the emotional well-being and psychosocial stress amongst caregivers. Because during the lockdown, what we saw in the institutions was that most of the caregivers were bound to stay with the children, and they could not go back to their families. The caregivers stress also saw an increase during this time. The evidence of harm that has been brought by the pandemic is already surfacing. There are several reports that are coming. Previous speakers have spoken about the spike in child marriage, the children being pushed further to child labor, the number of millions of children who will be further pushed to extreme poverty, and loss of livelihood. So we also saw that Childline, which is one of the premier institutions that provide emergency support to children across the country, there was an increase in the calls that Childline received over the initial period, and there was a 30% rise in the calls. Most of the calls were around, the need to food, the emergency services. Calls were received by children asking when will schools open, and it reflected a lot of the uncertainty that was playing around in children's minds. Besides, obviously, the impact that we already know the pandemic is having on the health and socio-economic conditions, the overall well-being across populations, especially children, which already has been flagged by many speakers before, has seen an increase. And we also saw reports coming where child pornography, online abuse was increasing, because even for children who were living in institutions, for those who had access to technological support, the screen time that children were spending increased substantially. Child marriages, labor, child trafficking, we've already spoken about. We also saw the risk of newer forms of abuse that, perhaps service providers and caregivers were not prepared to handle. Reports are also showing, obviously, the long-term consequences of this pandemic. It is undoing a lot of the progress that has been achieved in the last few years by collective efforts from the government and all stakeholders. For instance, if I have to give you an example in this context, we have care leavers. Now, these are people who have stayed as children in childcare institutions, and at the age of 18, they have to exit the institution and they are expected to live on their own. So, because they have this lack of family ecosystem around them after 18, they often find it very difficult to live an independent life. Even before the COVID-19 situation, the care leavers issue was almost unaddressed in the country. And after the pandemic, most of these care leavers who had struggled hard, got a job, were staying independently, we saw them leaving, quitting jobs, facing huge mental stress. And then because of the economic crisis that they always go through, they were thrown out from their rented apartments and then they became shelterless. Further widening the equity divide, obviously, we have all heard our previous speakers talk about. And what we also apprehend is that the overall crisis situation is going to see a lot of children now being pushed into institutional care because of the decreased lack of parental capacity to care for their children, the overall loss of livelihood, the extreme poverty situations. Parents will abandon their children, and the child welfare committees, which is the primary decision-making body under the juvenile justice law, because of a lack of very strong understanding that non-institutional care options need to be explored. They are going to order children to be sent to childcare institutions, and the numbers will see a rise. This is what we are fearing. During the last 5 months for the childcare institutions, their priorities have changed because this was a novel situation that was unexpected. There was no prior experience of handling this situation. Caregivers and the management of the institutions, they had to start from scratch. They had to care for the children, keeping in mind whatever resources they had in mind, and obviously the safety, security, health, education, keeping children engaged all the time was one of the primary considerations. There were several advisories that came from different stakeholders, including the Supreme Court of India, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and many other state governments issued advisories that clearly gave directions for the childcare institutions and the caregivers on how to go about the situation. But because each advisory had to be interpreted in their own way by the different institutions, it often led to a lot of confusions, and there was lack of standardized training around the advisories in terms of implementing them. Child protection functionaries rarely visited childcare institutions because of the constraints in movement, and most of the inspections, monitoring, the counseling moved to online video and WhatsApp calls, trying to keep everyone's morale high and get children's perspectives, listen to them, hear their voices. These were the efforts, I think, that became more important for the childcare institution. Timely coordination, immediate decision making became imperative to ensure timely response. For instance, during the lockdown, we also saw several advisories saying that to reduce the overcrowding in the institutions, children should be sent back to their families. Now, when you get this kind of an order from your childcare, child welfare committees, the childcare institutions often get into a hustle and try and comply by those orders, not understanding the long-term consequences of what action they are taking. To deliver a coordinated approach to caring and protecting for children and youth in the lockdown led to a lot of trainings that were imparted to the caregivers and the residential staff, and many, I think there were many resource materials, training modules and booklets by UNICEF, by Childline, by the government that were floated and helped a lot. Monitoring obviously took a setback, but what we experienced, at least in our Udayan Care context, was that most of the stakeholders, the duty bearers, tried their best to, quickly shift to online methods of monitoring and inspections. Some of the challenges that the institutions faced, and this is based on purely our experience of managing 17 small group homes at Udayan Care. Overall well-being of children and caregivers was adversely impacted. It led to a lot of spread of infections, leading to on-ground, mechanisms being changed. For instance, if there was a child who was running fever and experiencing cough and cold, isolating that child meant extra resources that the caregivers had to pay special attention towards. Professional staff, like I said, could not visit their home and got locked inside the children's home, leading to their own emotional stress and anxiety. Non-availability of professional staff in person. Saw that children, because they live in a controlled environment, often in the institutions, are used to physical hugs, a warm touch. This was completely taken away from the children, and that was leading to a lot of stress. The care approach had to change very quickly, and there was a lot of burden that the caregivers were experiencing, their own personal family issues, leading to a lot of staff attrition. We saw a lot of our caregivers putting in their papers, resigning, and saying they will not be able to continue with their work. Irregular supplies of groceries and basic necessities during the lockdown was a challenge during this period, and extra efforts had to be put in to ensure that there was enough supplies in the home so that children did not go hungry. Extra spend was required. So while we see that most of the childcare institutions are running on their own, the ones that are managed by NGOs and do not receive funding from the government, they experienced a lot of financial issues in terms of spending on protective equipment, sanitation materials, which was not something that was an expenditure item previously before this pandemic. Some of the other challenges, children obviously experienced loss of connection with self due to the reduced access to peer networks. They could not go to school. Avenues for any outdoor activity was closed. And like Rita ma'am said, this led to a lot of uncertainty and experiences because they were bound 24/7 inside the homes, feeling often isolated, lonely. Being confined in small spaces at the home and being asked to wear the mask all the time, maintaining physical and social distancing was a challenge because it's practically in a childcare institution setup. This is quite a difficult thing to do. Children often found it tough to adjust to new daily schedules, and caregivers tried to keep them engaged. So a lot of the mitigation depended on the creativity of the caregivers who were directly staying, 24/7 with the children. Sick rooms, like I mentioned, because of the lack of infrastructure, if there was a small sick room in a childcare institution, that was converted into a quarantine area, and space was a constraint with the new distancing norms that had to be followed. Isolation during quarantine could result in children being at risk of neglect and denied the nurturing they need. Individual attention, often to children that is paramount for them, was found missing. The impact on education and online learning, daily routine of children got disrupted. Most of your educational institutions, the children who are staying in the CCIs, they often go to pursue their vocational courses because all these institutions were closed. The children often found a lot of this daily routine being disrupted. Breakdown of social networks, as spoken about, since outside tutors, outside visitors were not allowed to enter the institutions, children were left without any academic support. Functionaries tried with their means to deliver uninterrupted education by going online, but most institutions struggle due to lack of devices and connectivity. We've seen that often in CCI, it is only the caregiver who has one smartphone, and then that one limited resource had to be shared with all the children, and that was a huge difficulty. Children often felt marginalized and deprived because they were missing on their new learnings, and caregivers were not trained. Caregivers did not even anticipate that they would get this as one of their duties to learn how to log on to a Google Classroom or a Microsoft Teams, but they tried their best to pick up. The career guidance and future goal orientation, which is an important development area when we care for children in institutions, this experienced a setup. Dropout rates in the future is feared to be increasing, and the digital risks also seem to be something that we need to worry about. When we talk about the children and youth's emotional well-being, because this, I think, is the underlying factor that impacts the other well-being of the child in an institution. Yeah.
Can you, because we have lost time in between, can you abridge your presentation towards the end so that we?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so
I have joined back. So Leena, thank you very much. So could I just take it from here quickly?
Yeah.
So basically, this slide talks about the impact on their emotional well-being. They were already traumatized and they were not getting, that kind of a psychological supervision, which is found. So online counseling actually, was stressing them out more. This is what we discovered, in many organizations. But sometimes, life skill sessions happened, it helped them. The children wanted, physical touch, but they could not get. And more often than not, we found children to be worrying about their families. Some of them showed guilt that back home, my family is not even getting food, at least I'm getting food here. So that was adding to their emotional problems. So screen time and disturbance in sleep, all this happened. And it became imperative that every child's under care and protection, they should be monitored on a daily basis because abuse can become rampant, in such situations. So it was very, okay. So now if you look at the compliances, even the compliances took a backseat. The licenses got delayed, the ICP's individual care plan got delayed, children committees were not happening as much, and management committees were happening even rarely or happening online. So a new child comes in, other children were feeling afraid. And rehabilitation and restoration efforts also were not happening, even though the release orders were there for CNCP and CICL children, but the restoration happening, and so it was to other emotional problems. And whenever the restorations happened, they happened without adequate social investigation and a follow-up plan. Financial support was not given to the families. So it is a very bad idea to abandon a child like this. And deinstitutionalization actually is becoming very difficult, opening up for revolving doors. So CCI is, next please. CCI is becoming like a, revolving. The children are coming in, children are going out. If you look at the road which is ahead for childcare institutions, I think it is full of perils. Economic slowdown means reduced funds, reduced donor commitments, CSR funds have been diverted, only 40% receive funding from ICPS. So you can imagine, 60% are dependent only on private donors. So this financial crunch, if it continues, what is it going to show? A major deficit, and many CCIs are already going through. Yesterday I was reading in the newspaper and about one institution which is looking after special needs children. From 75, they've reduced it to 30, and they had to let go of the staff because they just could not afford it. So there is a reduced access, we feel, about the child rights will not be served, mental health concerns everyone has been speaking about. It is just going to rise more and more. Staff attrition, we have already spoken about, and we have spoken about how many more children may find their way into institutional care. So these are the possibilities. And one, major section of the children who are coming out, who are called care leavers, they have been neglected by the system. And this pandemic actually, shows their crisis getting such worsened. For 18 years old, and rehabilitation plans have been made, and they were supposed to be going out. They are still in the institution. They are feeling bad, and they are wanting to, move themselves. And the others who have already gone out, they have not been trained in skills and resiliency. So they accept any kind of a job, and then they are getting thrown out because they don't have adequate skills. Opportunities for jobs are shrinking. Such huge resource crunch, crippled financial conditions, loss of jobs, unaffordable housing, no security at all, or safety net of family, mentors, or governmental provisions. In fact, we wrote to MWCD and other governments also that care leavers should be taken into account, and we did come to know that Maharashtra government did tell their DCPOs to find out who are the care leavers who had left. But after that, how they were served, I have no clue. So the chances of, can you go to the next one? Trauma, loneliness, all this is increasing. I would just like, after hearing all these, sad things, and which are only going to make us feel worse, and I would like to just tell you what we have been doing in Udayan Care. Our children have kept us strong. Our staff has kept us strong. It's a united family. First, we did was to develop SOPs, halls and trainings and refreshers were given again and again. Daily schedule for children was designed in such a way, in a participatory manner, so that the children feel involved. Regular online counseling, motivation and training were given. Although we have seen online counseling doesn't work always, but it does work at least a little bit. And all the devices and internet access was updated so that children don't have to listen to their teachers. Even in government schools where some of the children are going, the teachers were getting so angry that you people don't even have a proper smartphone. I mean, teachers also in education department also need to make the teachers little sensitized towards children who are from the CCIs and coming to their schools. So children had to hear all this. And our caregivers, they really walk that extra mile in keeping everything, well-oiled and moving. Next, please. Children, they showed their best self. They developed stories around Corona. They wrote poems. They wrote quizzes, even Corona theatre. That, I think, that was their defense mechanism, coping with Corona. All the mentors, social workers, counselors, they are in touch with children. We are hearing them patiently, understanding their anxieties and misconceptions, trying to allay them. So you can see, the positive outcomes. We developed a beautiful program which is called Ghar Wapsi, seeing our care leavers losing jobs left, right, and center. So we have developed a Ghar Wapsi program where we are keeping our own care leavers who were working earlier. They are coming back and staying with us till the time this crisis is over. We got, almost 150 care leavers from all over the world to come on webinars. And when they discussed with each other, whether you are from Africa, you are from India, you are from Europe, they discovered that they had the same gaps in their systems. And they came up with recommendations which we have presented to the different governments and to the UN bodies. I hope somebody will listen. If you look at the road which is before us, we really need to repair this road. We need to do rapid assessments. Udayan Care has started a little rapid assessment of the mental health of the caregivers who stay with the children in these crisis times. So we have done that, and yours is a university, and before that, you are doing a lot of work. I know that, you have special departments also, looking after early childhood and foster care and all those kind of things. This is the time to do a lot of rapid assessments and develop preventive measures which can help the governments. And we have to develop systems by which this epidemic of abuse can be stalled. Government needs to increase its budgetary investments. Can't tell only CCIs that you have to do this and you have to do that. Recently, we got a circular from one of the governments that in all your CCIs the children who came in this COVID times and who have been restored, you have to pay 2,000 rupees per month per child. And we were calculating it was coming to an astounding 4-5 lakhs of rupees. When resource crunch is there and we are not accepting any money from the government, it should be government job. And Supreme Court advisory clearly says that it is the governments who have to do it. So these kind of, confusing circulars are making CCI, functionaries even more worried. We have to be very vigilant, the child when they are coming in, so that the infection doesn't spread. Off late, you must
Kiran ma'am, you need to wrap up. We have over
this is last two lines.
Please.
So we need to have multi-stakeholder collaborations where civil society, governments, and individuals, everybody's heard, and we develop a process. We have to develop a system by which this push towards institutionalization can be stalled. Thank you very much, and I'm so sorry for wasting a lot of time in the beginning.
No, not at all. It was a pleasure having you back. And in fact, listening to the experiences of how Udayan Care has worked with the children from Udayan Ghars during the COVID-19 pandemic, the peak time when it was very, although things are still not good, but then this is something which we all need to understand. And it is really an informative talk which was shared by Lina. And then definitely you gave it a logical end also. Thank you, Kiran. May I now request Professor Zubair Minai, who is a discussant in this panel, to share his views. Over to Professor Zubair Minai.
Thank you, Archana. Thank you all panelists, and thank you, Professor Edgar for joining us. It is so nice to see you here. I actually intended to give a wrap up of what all four people have presented, but I think the time does not permit that. So I will quickly wrap up with my thoughts. And I think one of the most important things that has come up in this webinar is that people said that our fault lines have been exposed. I think it's not just the fault lines that have been exposed, it is our smugness that has been exposed. We have been exposed in the sense that we were never, we never thought in those terms that the society has been kind of so stratified and there is so much inequity all around, and we were being very smug about what we were doing. So I think that is one thing that we have to come out of very, very quickly. The important thing that has come out is that we are talking of marginalized children who in any case were disadvantaged and had existing problems of their own, and there has now been a compounding of their problems. And I think one of the things that is the key driver is the loss of livelihood of either the families or the children themselves, because of which children are getting into child labor, the pressure on girls to contribute to home and sibling care, the increased risk of trafficking and closure of schools, detachment from the education system, probably dropping out, then the closing of Anganwadi schools, not only a nutritional crisis, but also a learning crisis for everyone, the mental health and well-being being impacted adversely. So all these things have been very well kind of articulated by everyone of each of these four panelists. And I think what the CCIs have also brought out that their substantive role of developing family-based care and other things has taken a backseat, and they are now to accommodate all other kinds of requests. But I think one of the challenges for the CCIs would be when these children would be, as I said, they have to be sent back to the families, or they are being asked by CWCs to take more children into there. So it is going to create problems, and when you start unburdening, that is again going to be a lot of problems, because they may not be in the best interest of the child, and you have to push children out of your system. So basically, these are kind of first aid responses that we will not be able to go deeply into the root causes of the separation of the children from their families. And as you said very rightly, it is just a kind of a revolving door thing that is going to happen. But I think one of the things that we learned from this webinar, and particularly for social work and child professionals, is that in times like these, what is required is learning or thinking on your feet. None of these organizations and people had the luxury of a theory or a model or even data to work to base their work on. And as a result, it is even difficult to comprehend the magnitude and the extent of the problem. We have absolutely no idea when we started in March as to what is going to happen. And these people have been responding. So that thinking on your feet is what actually helps. And when Kiran pointed out that state requirements and directions kept on changing, and it must have been very difficult for people to handle this. Also, we are aware that this pandemic is unique from other emergencies like earthquakes and floods and communal life because, one, there was no lead time given to anyone. The lockdown was imposed just without any warning. There was fear of catching the virus by the care workers also, the social workers also. And there were containment zones, there was massive worldwide effects. So this is very, very critical for us to understand that they were working in this kind of a resource-constrained environment. But my major learning from these presentations is, and I've always been a great votary of this, and I keep saying that social work is a practice-led profession. It is not theories which get implemented. That is what my experience is. But what gets implemented gets crystallized into theories and models and work. So the learnings from your presentations, all 4 presentations, are something that are important for us to kind of crystallize into some kind of models and theories, as you have all pointed out. The other concern is the lack of data and information. Even now, there is a policy from the government about health data management, and they've given you 1 week to respond to that. So the long-term impact of this crisis, this continuing crisis, have still to be comprehended. For example, this closing of schools for the last 6 months, how it is going to play out in the form of learning and continuation of the school system, particularly for these marginalized groups. How will this non-access to institutional birth? Women couldn't go to hospitals to give birth to children. The non-access to nutrition, non-access to immunization. How will it affect the survival and development of these children? These have all been brought out very, very interestingly. So I think what needs to be done is we build evidence on the impact, on what worked and what didn't work, design child-centered services as much as possible, strengthen our child protection systems, as we have all pointed out, and then build resilience, which Prabhat talked about, starting from preschool upwards, so that we as a society are able to handle crises like these on our own, and we don't have that much of emotional and psychological issues. So we have to restore the child focus of priority. Social investment is very, very important. Social assistance is very, very important. And also, when we have disaster management plans for all states, for all districts, for the country, there is a distinct lack of child-focused intervention in disaster management plans. And we have all been governed by the Disaster Management Act since March. But if you look at all the acts, we've done a study of that. None of the district state plans, except for Delhi and Jammu and Kashmir, have any mention of child-focused intervention in the disaster management plan. So that is also one important thing that we can advocate for. And lastly, we need to rebuild the social solidarity and the social capital in the communities, because discrimination, scapegoating, prejudice, targeting have also existed alongside solidarity and other things. So I think the agenda for social workers and other people is pretty large, and I thank all the 4 panelists for bringing that out so effectively. And thank you, social work and early childhood, for this wonderful opportunity, and all the participants. Thank you so much.
May I come in for a second?
Thank you, Professor Minai. Although we have already gone beyond 1 o'clock, but then still we can afford at least a couple of questions. I think Professor Khan wants to say something. Yes, Professor Khan.
Only for a couple of minutes. Well, I greatly appreciate the webinar and the galaxy of questions you have been able to foregather, who have shared their thought-provoking ideas with me. Well, the pandemic has wreaked havoc on all segments of population, but I would like to focus on margin, the category you have chosen, margin. Now, before I proceed further, I would like to congratulate the webinar directors, Zubair Minai and Archana Dasi, for picking up a social issue which is very relevant and very contemporary. Here I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there have been people, marginal population groups, which were too self-centered, who did not want to go for begging and who could not maintain their household or pay adequate attention to their children. Well, some years ago, I had conducted a study on child abuse sponsored by Canadian CIDA, and there we had come across some cases, not very many, but some cases where children or girl children or adolescent girl children were being exploited or sexploited. Well, we have a framework, legal framework, you can mention JJ Act or POCSO Act or even Indian Code, but they were of little or no avail because parents or elderly in the household themselves were turning a blind eye towards the problem. I think such cases need also to be, while discussing marginal groups, such cases should also be focalized. Once again, I would like to congratulate webinar directors, Zubair Minai and Archana Dasi. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Khan. We are getting lots of comments in the chat box, and I think all of you must be going through it. To end, I have the responsibility of proposing the vote of thanks. To begin with, we would like to thank our Vice Chancellor, who has provided constant guidance, encouragement, and in her busy schedule, she found time for us. Thank you, Professor Najma Akhtar. We are very thankful to our resource persons for sharing their experiences and also giving a way forward. In fact, we have so many social work students, scholars, and faculty members sitting here and listening to this webinar. And this is something what we are also discussing at our end, that what is going to be the role of our student trainees, in this fieldwork post-COVID, and what are the kind of things which they have to concentrate on. And we have got quite a lot of suggestions from all the 4 resource persons. Thank you, Professor Minai, for wrapping it up and definitely, giving us a final suggestion that what all now the social work departments have to think about. We are very thankful to all the faculty members from Jamia and outside Jamia who have been a part of this webinar. Similarly, we have number of research scholars, students from Jamia and other universities who have taken part in this webinar, both on the Google Meet as well as on our YouTube channel, because I'm getting a message that around more than 100 people are watching us there also live. So thank you all the audiences, and thank you all the organizations who participated here. We had people from NITSID, NCRT, and Butterflies, I could see. We had people from UNICEF Tezpur who had joined. So thank you everyone once again, and it was wonderful. But then we'll keep meeting and we'll keep bothering you once again with all our experiences of relating and interacting continuously with the stakeholders. Thank you. You are all requested, the audience is requested to fill the feedback form. We have provided the link in the chat box. Thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Archana and Professor Zubair. Thanks for all that. Thanks a
Thank
lot.
you very much. I missed Prabhat, your speech. I don't know what happened to my Google Meet. It has never happened before. I'm feeling so strange.
Some of you also missed out. I'm Kiran Modi. But I have a good back and then you can find it.
You cannot trust our network always.
I know. Thankfully, in the morning only, I had emailed it to Lena. And so thankfully she picked it up, And I finished the entire presentation. And then I realized I'm speaking to no one. First time experience this. Thank you so much.
Good. So thank you, both of you, Professor Archana Dasi and Professor
And Aftab had already told me that we are not going to use the
Yes. The reason being because I did it for a couple of minutes and it was always problematic.
Yeah,
So I
same thing with me. So I decided to just talk through.
Good idea. I'm going to do the same next time. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you and keep engaging. That's really wonderful. Jamia has taken this initiative.
And Kiran, bye all of you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.